In the official language of the Imperial Japanese Army, it was a research detachment. To the people imprisoned inside, it was a place almost no one left alive. Unit 731 was a secret military facility operated by Japan between the early 1930s and the end of World War II. Its work centered on biological and chemical warfare, but its most infamous legacy is lethal human experimentation. The facility was not a rogue basement operation run by a few isolated extremists. It was supported by the Japanese military, protected by secrecy, and integrated into wartime planning. Its victims were treated not as human beings, but as disposable material for experiments. Understanding Unit 731 means confronting one of the darkest intersections of science, empire, racism, and war. Unit 731 was based mainly in the Pingfong district of Harbin, in Manchukuo, the puppet state Japan created after occupying Manchuria. Today, that area is part of northeast China. Its location mattered. Manchuria gave Japanese military researchers distance from Japan's home islands, access to occupied populations, and a controlled colonial environment where secrecy could be enforced. The unit also maintained branches across mainland China and Southeast Asia, making it part of a broader military network rather than a single isolated site. Officially, it was known as the Manchu Detachment 731. It was also called the Kamo Detachment and the Ishii Unit, after its leading figure, General Shiro Ishii. Behind bureaucratic names was an industrialized program of abuse. The driving figure behind Unit 731 was Shiro Ishii, an army medical officer who believed biological weapons could give Japan a strategic advantage. In an age when states were studying poison gas, epidemic disease, and modern mass warfare, Ishii pushed the idea that pathogens could be weaponized against enemy soldiers and civilians. The Japanese military gave him resources, personnel, buildings, and prisoners. The project blended medical expertise with military ambition, turning trained doctors and scientists into participants in atrocity. That is one of the most disturbing aspects of Unit 731. It shows that education and technical skill do not automatically create moral restraint. In this case, scientific methods were redirected toward cruelty, conquest, and killing. Inside Unit 731, prisoners were deliberately infected with deadly diseases so researchers could observe the effects. These diseases included pathogens studied for use in biological warfare, such as plague, cholera, and other epidemic illnesses. The goal was not treatment. The goal was to learn how disease progressed, how quickly it killed, and how it might spread through populations. Prisoners were also subjected to chemical agents, explosives, and environmental tests. Some were placed in hypobaric chambers to study the effects of extreme pressure changes. Others were exposed to freezing conditions, toxins, or battlefield-style injuries. The experiments were designed to produce data for the military, and the people forced into them were denied even the most basic recognition of their humanity. Unit 731 staff referred to prisoners as maryuta, often translated as logs. The term reflected the deliberate dehumanization at the center of the operation. If victims could be spoken of as objects, it became easier for the perpetrators to pretend that murder was research. The prisoners were mainly Chinese civilians, but they also included Russians, Koreans, and others. Children and pregnant women were among the victims. People could be arrested as suspected resistance members, political prisoners, or simply as bodies the system could use. No documented survivors of the facility are known. That absence is not incidental. The experiments were often designed to be fatal, and the secrecy of the program depended on eliminating witnesses. Among the most notorious practices connected to Unit 731 was vivisection, cutting into living prisoners, often without anesthesia, to observe organs and disease progression directly. The unit also carried out organ harvesting and amputations. These acts were not accidents or punishments carried out in sudden rage. They were structured procedures performed in a military research setting. The language of science was used to conceal the reality of torture. Researchers claimed they needed unaltered data, arguing that anesthesia or natural death might affect their observations. This logic reveals the moral collapse at the heart of the unit. Human suffering was not merely ignored, it was made into the method. The deaths inside the Pingfang facility alone are estimated at around 14,000 people. But Unit 731's impact reached far beyond the walls of its laboratories and prison blocks. The unit developed biological weapons that were used in Chinese cities and villages. Japanese forces deliberately contaminated water supplies, food, and agricultural land. Disease-bearing materials were spread to trigger outbreaks among civilians. These attacks transformed ordinary parts of daily life, wells, crops, meals, into instruments of war. The estimated death toll from biological warfare connected to Unit 731 is at least 200,000 people. The number is staggering, but it represents more than a statistic. It means families, communities, and entire local histories shattered by engineered epidemic violence. The use of biological warfare in China reflected a broader pattern of imperial occupation. Civilian populations were treated as obstacles, resources, or test subjects, not as protected human communities. Unit 731 operated in a context where colonial rule, military secrecy, and wartime ideology reinforced one another. The victims were often people with little ability to defend themselves or even to be recognized internationally while the crimes were happening. This is why Unit 731 cannot be understood only as a story about a laboratory. It was part of an occupation system that made mass violence administratively possible. The facility needed guards, doctors, supply chains, buildings, military approval, and silence. Atrocity was organized. When Japan's defeat became unavoidable in 1945, the people connected to Unit 731 tried to erase evidence. Facilities were destroyed, prisoners were killed, and records were hidden or removed. The goal was to prevent the Allies, the Chinese, and the Soviet Union from fully documenting what had happened. Yet enough evidence survived through testimony, captured materials, and later investigations to expose the scale of the crimes. The end of the war did not bring immediate justice for most victims. Instead, Unit 731 became entangled in the emerging Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union both saw biological warfare knowledge as strategically valuable. The pursuit of intelligence began to compete with the pursuit of accountability. In 1949, the Soviet Union tried 12 members of Unit 731 at the Khabarovsk war crimes trials. They were convicted and sentenced to prison. These trials helped place information about Japanese biological warfare into the public record, but they did not reach many of the most important figures. Shiro Ishii and numerous key personnel avoided prosecution by the United States. In exchange for research data, they received immunity. The Truman administration concealed the unit's crimes and even paid stipends to some former personnel. This decision remains one of the most controversial post-war choices made by American authorities in Asia. It meant that men involved in mass human experimentation were protected because their knowledge was considered useful. The irony is that the data acquired from Unit 731 appears not to have been especially valuable. The United States biological weapons program had already advanced beyond much of what Unit 731 could offer. Yet the immunity deal still helped bury the truth and delay public recognition of the victims. The Soviet Union also likely extracted information from Japanese sources, and may have used documentation to support its own biological weapons work, including facilities such as Sverdlovsk. Even the relatively limited sentences at Khabarovsk may have reflected an exchange of punishment for intelligence. In both cases, the victim's suffering was treated as a bargaining chip in a new geopolitical struggle. The Cold War did not just inherit wartime secrets, it preserved some of them. For decades, Unit 731 remained under-recognized compared with many other wartime crimes. Survivors' families, Chinese communities, historians, journalists, and activists pushed for acknowledgement. On August 28, 2002, the Tokyo District Court formally recognized that Japan had conducted biological warfare in China and held the state responsible for related deaths. This did not restore the lives taken, nor did it fully resolve the historical and political disputes surrounding the unit. But recognition matters because denial compounds violence. Unit 731 is a warning about what happens when science is severed from ethics, when states hide crimes behind national security, and when human beings are reduced to data. Its history demands remembrance not for shock, but for accountability. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.